Thank you so much. Put this over here. I have been here before, but not for a very long time. It's good to renew friendships and to meet new people as well. And I want to say thank you for this happening, this wonderful time of coming together. And Terry and I have talked for a long time about the importance of community. And this just came up so well. And so she and Mary Ellen Bartholomew worked on it, and Tim West, and I know a whole lot of other people, but if I start naming, I'm sure to leave out somebody. So I'm not going to do that. But it's wonderful to be here. I'm just loving it, and loving being here with you. And I couldn't help, I wasn't going to tell this little story, but when the Irish eyes are smiling, I have to share my favorite Irish story before I start my talk. And that is when my daughter was in kindergarten, the teacher had them talking about what their ancestry was, you see. And so my daughter, her name was Holly, and she said, my father is Indian and English, and my mother is English, and I'm Irish. And the teacher just got on her and said, oh, no, you couldn't be. I am too Irish. So I'm an adoptive mother. And she she in her little girl books, we had stories about the adoptive family, and she was good at sharing that. So that's my favorite story. I lost her from this physical life when she was 46, and I just knew when that song came up, she was telling me I had to tell that story. So good to be here. Good to see those of you who came over from Sequim, and just to share who we are in a New Thought philosophy. And thank you so much for the opening, and thank you, Al, for the music, and thank you, Reverend Victoria and Glenda Tottenhatch, and just was wonderful. It was wonderful to open up to this. I was delighted when this came to fruition that it would be St. Patrick's Day, because that's one of my favorite people also. So who was this St. Patrick anyway? There are so many stories about him that it's difficult to separate fact from fiction, just like the stories about Jesus, of course. Glenda's beautiful treatment this morning tells us who we are, and also who Patrick was, and then we'll look a little closer at some of the things that formed who he became. So for me, I have found that legendary stories, with the legendary stories, there's usually an inner story that's hidden from sight, and within the outer story. And the inner story is what reveals an inner or metaphysical truth that's helpful for us in our everyday living experiences. So most stories about St. Patrick go like this. Patrick became the patron saint of Ireland and the symbol of all things Irish, but he wasn't Irish at all. And I know you probably know that stuff, He was British. Born in the year 389 AD on the west coast of Britain, which was not yet England. And my father was born in England, so I got a lot of that background as I was growing up. But at that point, it was still under the weakening control of the Roman Empire. And so the story tells us that one night, 16-year-old Patrick was asleep when a band of Irish pirates swept into the village, making lots of noise, and they smashed down the door, and they jerked him out of the bed and threw him on the floor and tied up his hands behind him, and they took him and shoved him on their boat to take back to Ireland. And he was soon then going to this forbidden land which was very much judged, by the English and so forth. But he was taken away to live the life of a slave. Now, Patrick had grown up with a Christian in a Christian household, but his family's faith was not really interesting it meant very little to him at that point. So he had really no spiritual foundation. Well, I remember being a teenager and going to church, it was kind of okay, that it's okay, and we had the youth group and we sang songs and so forth. So, but, I was a teenager. Patrick was a teenager. So he was asleep to his spiritual identity. Maybe some of you can relate to that. I certainly can. He was kind of sleepwalking through life, and so what hadn't gotten in touch with spiritual connection. Well, being asleep then puts us at risk to be abducted into uncomfortable or painful experiences. Psychologically, our adolescent and teenage years are the task for that, of course, is to develop our SOS, our sense of self. Anybody here still working on that? I'm just asking. I don't want to be alone in that, So ultimately, it's a spiritual search, isn't it? And we probably are doing it all of our lives. But if we're asleep to the task, then other influences may enter that the ego will define as our goal. And so that's why drugs and alcohol and risky behavior can bring such a heavy toll, especially in those formative teenage years. At a time when we're being prompted to separate from patterns of our families of origin and begin to build our own identities, we can be carried away into experiences where we are mistaking our task in life. So Patrick was carried away to confinement and slavery. But the crisis of slavery made a huge impact on Patrick's life. He began to recall at that time fragments of spiritual lessons from his childhood. And he began to sneakily, I would suppose, find ways to study even about that. So, of course, he would have been carrying some anger over his situation. And he constantly dreamed of running away and running back and praying for the day when he would be able to return home. And then the opportunity did come. After 6 years of captivity, he escaped to France and finally led to him returning back to England. And during this time, though, he had been getting back to studying Christianity, and actually became a priest during that time. And then came the dream that you all know about. He saw a man in his dream who seemed to be coming from Ireland, and the man handed him a letter that was headed "The Voice of the Irish," and it read, "We beseech you, holy youth, to come and walk once more with us." Well, Patrick had experienced being angry and rageful at the circumstances that had imprisoned him. But see, by this time, he was also getting in touch with his spiritual identity. And he was able to see that a way out of his predicament could be through the act of forgiveness. Without this component, I'm quite sure that Patrick would not have evolved into the spiritual leader, Saint Patrick, patron saint of Ireland, who journeyed back to Ireland on a mission of love and mercy, serving there for 30 years as a wandering bishop, establishing churches and monasteries all throughout the whole country. You know, sometimes when I say something like that, I get this inner chill. And so Patrick might even be right here in this room, you know? So the rage that he had felt had been transformed as he came to the realization and to believe very strongly that it was in God's hands that took him to Ireland in the first place. And now, through a series of dreams, he was saying that he was feeling that God had called him back to return. Patrick had suffered through years of pain and mistreatment, but now he was learning to love those whom he had called his enemies and pray for those who had mistreated him. So Patrick had experienced being a slave at the hands of the Irish, but he'd also come to know them and to understand their ways as well as having the background of the spiritual teachings. He knew both, and he knew this from his beginnings. You know, don't we know things from our early years that we find out later aren't really true? Well, he knew both the British and the Romans looked upon the Irish as uncivilized savages. And he'd heard that before, you know, up until he was 16. That's the kind of thing he had heard. But Patrick had been over there, and he'd seen them, and he knew them as valuable people as well. Where he learned their language and their ways of thinking. And even though this was from an apparently negative experience of being a slave, he was able to see the culture in a different way. See it differently, right? That's, of course, in Myrtle it says that. Just to look at it differently. I'm working with my 17-year-old great-grandson who lives in Phoenix area. He has MS. He's been diagnosed for over a year now. A lot of things that go with MS are things like anger, body pain, falling, migraine headaches, and things like that. And he's also very intelligent. He makes really good grades, but he's been separated from the mainstream of kids because of he's also autistic, so he's been separated from the very beginning. So he looks at his world and he says, nothing is ever going to work for me. No, nothing. This is MS. If I say, well, what about, this? No, the MS always goes back to making that an important thing, you see. So then I will tell him that he could look at it differently. How do you think that goes over? But I'm not going to give up either. So at this point, though, Patrick has seen the culture in a different. Let me see it differently. He had totally forgiven by that time, and he wanted to share his God with them, with these Irish people. And in his writing of the Confessio, I was going to look that up. Maybe afterwards you can tell me what that really is. But in his writing of it, he states his gratitude to God that he was able to return to the people of Ireland. I don't think, even though they called Patrick a saint, that he was really that much different from us. We all have unfair things happen to us. We can choose to cling to the hurt and let it poison us and destroy our day-to-day happiness, or we can choose to release the hurt and trust Spirit to transform us, to transform the experience for us so that we become elevated in our own spiritual growth. Forgiveness is never done for the other person. When we think of we just forgive someone who hurt us and that's over, we need to know we don't forgive them for their sakes. We forgive for our own sake. It's true, when we forgive someone, we set a prisoner free. That prisoner isn't the other person, though. It's us. You know, I've had that experience of forgiving something that was in my family of origin when I was growing up, and going back and doing that. It set me so free, and I was able to have friendship for the last 10 years of my father's life. There's nothing like it, really. There's nothing like that kind of freedom. So the prisoner isn't the other person, it's ourselves. So it seems there are a lot of lessons to learn from the history of St. Patrick, really. The freedom of forgiveness that has been mentioned, and perhaps practicing forgiveness, we also open up a joyous life, like happened with Patrick. Then, being true to himself, what about the belief, like the treatment said, that belief in himself and the integrity that came forth in Patrick, as he was also able to enjoy the diversity of other cultures. You know, that's what's so neat about joining here. We aren't really other cultures, but here we are sharing our experiences and sharing who we are in our new thought pathways as well. It's so wonderful to be in this energy. I love it. So, and Terry's the first one that said something to me about it. You know, we need to do something about community. And there's a whole lot of other things on our mind too. It isn't just this. So enjoying the diversity of different cultures, the ability to enjoy acceptance and sharing of community without separating attitudes of us and them. I don't listen to too much on the news anymore as well. So he had come from cultures that discriminated against the other. Don't we see that in the world we live in? And they want us to hear it on the news a lot. So, you know, the truth is, we are, like the song says, we are all one. We celebrate that. Well, Patrick knew what the experience of being a prisoner was. He had literally been a prisoner, and now he had gained the understanding of what it might be like to be a prisoner of your own anger and rage. And he also had a destiny to fulfill. And to continue to be enslaved in rage would have stood in the way of that destiny coming forth that still affects people. So forgiveness set him free to experience his own destiny. The joyful life, then, that was waiting for him. He set himself free through his ability to forgive his captors. So what had been meant for harm, God transformed into Patrick's advantage. Often we're hurt by the actions of other people. And when we put our focus on the other person, it's just taking up time, you know, stating over and over again, like that's the truth. But the truth is much deeper. What is often going on, and what we need to really stop and realize, is that people who hurt us often have problems. Hurting people hurt people, right? And we don't even really have to understand that. And, you know, for a long while I thought I did, you know, because if I could just understand it, I could put it in my frame of reference of being okay. How that doesn't work. Blue Joy has a book on that. So if anybody's read that. So just understanding it so I could put it in my own frame of reference is just another way to avoid. All we need to know is that people who love themselves don't strike out to attack and hurt the other person. So if we have experienced hurt through an action of someone else, we can realize that what we're looking at is a lack of self-love, and we can send them our loving thoughts until the day comes that they can accept that for themselves. And then we realized nothing was ever personal anyway. Just came into our atmosphere to be healed. You know? So what is this to me? Just something to heal. And of course, that's what, yes, that's what Patrick did, you see. He returned to Ireland then to face and help his former enemies who had enslaved him. He came back to help them and minister to them. Fantastic. That's what happens in AA too, you know, recovering addicts go back and help people who are still struggling with that because they know the freedom that comes from it. So there's lots of confirming lessons that we could take from this story of St. Patrick. The importance, for instance, of waking up, that's pretty important. Staying alert, awake, and aware of the circumstances in our lives and becoming attuned to the ways that we can create a spiritual foundation and identity that's going to support us through the rest of our lives, especially when the experiences have been of discord or when they come up that are of discord. And next is to realize that those experiences are in our lives just asking to be healed. So as soon as we can, release our own personal pain, the places where we take offenses, and to practice forgiveness of the situation of everyone involved. That's how we get that healing to happen. And we would want to accomplish this in order that we might move into our own destiny with grace and with ease, just as Patrick did in bringing people together. We can participate in healing separations. So, you know, as I think about my pathway when I moved up here, basically, my husband wanted to his job had changed, and he wanted to get into the Northwest or places where there are trees and water. And I was getting to a point where the summers in the desert were debilitating. So the hardest thing I did was leave my work at Betty Ford. But anyway, we came here. And my husband would say to me, well, what are you going to do? And I would say, I don't know, but God has always given me something to do. And so I moved here. He came in February, and I put the house up for sale and moved up here on May 2nd. And by July 6th, we started our first service with people I didn't know. I didn't know a single person in the congregation. And so I never really made that connection, but my forgiveness thing may have been the thing that brought that destiny into my life. So here I am, it's 27 years or so in ministry, and in a place where I thought it was too small to have a church. They said, oh, come on, we want to do it. And I said, are you sure there's enough people up here? Because I was from the California area and so forth. Yeah. So anyway, I just want to say thank you all for making this coming together happen in such a beautiful way. This is a lovely sanctuary here. I've loved being in it. Barbara Jeske and I, way back, did some workshops here, because we're always renting a place. So we came here and did it. And so I've had a history of a few Sundays and ceremonies and classes I've done. And I just love being here in this room with all of you. Thank you. Thank you.